So right now we're going to hear from Andrew Scott. Andrew is a clinical psychologist living in Sydney. He's a husband, he's a father of two. He's also my long-time childhood friend, close friend. He's an avid board game player and a novice runner. So hobbies are also really good for your mental health. And yes, he also works in a high school and primary school as a clinical psychologist. So he's going to speak to us for the next 30 minutes about healing, the healing benefits of spiritual beliefs. So without further ado, Andy, or Andrew.
Okay. Thank you so much, Katie. I really appreciate the introduction and the throwback to our childhood friendship. And yeah, thank you so much for Katie and Vicky and the whole team that have been making today possible. It's really exciting to be a part of this, but yeah, there's a little round of applause. Thanks for the team. There's a lot behind the scenes I know that's gone into making today happen. It's a real honour to be a part of it, and really excited to be talking to you guys today a little bit about mental health and spirituality. And so it's going to be a little bit of a collaboration, because this is going to be some topics that I'm not necessarily an expert on, more someone who's learning along the journey with other people. So thank you all, those who came back after lunch. I hope you feel energised and that you've got some fuel in the tank. Are you all with me today? Yeah, all right. I love that. All right. Well, let's dive into this. I know it's been some big topics, and I really appreciate that your keenness to learn about these aspects of life that are really important. I was blown away, Libby, by lots of your presentation, but just the financial cost to society, and sometimes dollars speak to us in a different way, and we can understand the breadth of the impact and just how eating disorders can have such a ripple effect to so many people and families. And we're really talking to this idea of moving to wellness, and I love this topic. So I was like, okay, spirituality, mental health, that's really broad. I've got half an hour. What am I going to do to kind of narrow it down a little bit? And one of the things that's the biggest barrier in moving to wellness for a lot of the people I work with, and also I think for myself in my own life, is shame. The emotion, the concept of shame. And it's a huge barrier to moving to wellness. It really tends to isolate us, lock us away from other people, and prevent us from being able to take the steps that would be really helpful for us. So I think shame's a really universal experience. So if I throw this out to the audience here, the question, what is shame? I'm hoping some people will have some things to throw back to me. So what is shame? What's a characteristic? Has something to do with shame? There's almost no wrong answers here. Yeah, negative emotion attached to your behaviour or your person. Love that, yep. It's a very unpleasant, very uncomfortable emotion. Some people would find it the most unpleasant emotion. Yeah, it's a lot. It's interesting how many languages, how many words we have to describe shame, and things that we have to talk about shame without actually ever saying the word shame. And I think there's something in that as well. Any other thoughts, Mark?
Something really wrong with me.
Yeah, something really wrong with me. And not even, I like the really, it's not just a little bit. Shame in its most powerful form feels like this is really wrong with me.
Yeah, it is inferior, even rejection from ourselves.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Yeah, feeling inferior and that sense of rejection, like that there's something about me that other people are just going to push away. They can't, if they really knew this about me, because sometimes we get it before we get the rejection, right? If they actually knew this part of me, there's no way they would still, stay connected with me. Yeah. Yes, I'm a really bad person. Any others? That's a really good, I think, yes.
Gross disappointment in yourself.
Oh, I love that. A gross disappointment in yourself. I'm going to sit with that one a little bit, yeah. This is great. I've done my talk, so that's shame. I've got a couple of things. There is like the APA, the American Psychological Society, have this dictionary that has a definition, and it's really quite long, and it's too hard to kind of use practically, I think. So I just brought out some ideas, and these have really been captured by a lot of your answers already. Shame is the fear of disconnection. There's something core about shame that it's a fear that we are going to be somehow intolerable to the people around us, that we're going to be completely isolated. And therefore, we tend to isolate ourselves first. Connection is such a primal need for humans. It's, we need food, we need water, we need some shelter, we need connection, we need community. And without that, we suffer, not just psychologically, but we start to physically suffer. And they've, done studies with, orphans raised in orphanages without that human connection, and you can see the impacts. So have a read about that. That idea of there's something about me that if people were to find out, they'd never associate with me again. And shame goes beyond that idea of just feeling bad about a behavior or something I've done, but flows into my sense of self, my identity, or my sense of worth. So you can understand how it would be really inhibiting to our movement towards wellness. And I think it's important to note some other things as well when we're talking about shame, that not all shame's harmful. And so there's different ways that people talk about and kind of differentiate this idea of like toxic shame versus other shame, or whether they talk about guilt and shame, or whether they talk about these ideas of helpful and unhelpful shame. But there is some evidence that there's some shame that we can tolerate and manage and repair and move forward, and it helps. But generally, shame can be a really, really difficult and really unhelpful emotion. Shame can be a bit of a state or a trait. So you can have an experience of shame, and we all tend to have an experience of shame at some point in our lives, or it can be more of an enduring trait. For some of us, we're really shame-prone, as that our personalities are such, or our schemas are such, that we tend towards shameness or have shame as a very common reaction in our lives. And shame-proneness has been associated with lots of mental health challenges like depression, like anxiety, like eating disorders, and trauma. And it's highly activating, right? So, the fight, flight, or freeze response, the experience of shame is really going to activate that response because it is a threat. It's a threat both to our sense of connection, and that's a primal need, and it's also a threat to our sense of self. So it's a double attack. It's an attack of one of our primary needs, and it's an attack to our very psychological sense of self. And so if the Dan Siegel hand model of the brain, the flipping of the lid, our lids with shame, that's an emotion that's going to quickly flip our lid and everything that goes along with it. So what do we see with shame? Back to the audience. What do people tend to do when they experience shame? Withdraw, yeah. That's the big one, right? Pull back, hide. Any other things? John?
Defensiveness.
Yeah, defensiveness is a big one, right? So the counterattack. Any others? Yeah.
I'm very disappointed, but parts of ourselves that we repress and just given away that we're shameful, that we reject. Sometimes we can manifest shame projections to others.
Yeah. So almost cutting off parts of ourselves and partitioning ourselves and then projecting those parts that we find intolerable in ourselves onto other people. Yeah, so you can see it really can flow into how you relate to yourself and how you relate to others, and really break down on your connections with other people. So I grabbed a couple. This isn't an exhaustive list, but this is, I guess, some of the ones that I commonly come across when I'm working with people. So disproportionate reactions. Sometimes you have an encounter or something happens and you kind of have this big reaction, you walk away and go, that wasn't how I would usually respond in that situation, or that was a weird way I reacted there. Or you might notice it in somebody else. That was a massive reaction from that person. I wonder what happened there. That's often a sign that shame was touched upon in some way in that interaction. Something was elicited there. Or anger, towards ourselves or other people, the self-critical thoughts that just might all be internalized, or the blowback at other people. Hide is a huge one, right? So the escape, avoid. There's things I don't even talk about. If that's taken to an extreme example, people can have a complete shutdown response or even start feeling dissociation. Perfectionism goes along with shame. It's that intolerance of being able to make mistakes or vulnerability. Blame, defensiveness, as John said. So with these things, I think it's helpful just to take a moment, and it'll be more helpful for you as we go through the next bit. If you can identify, is this something that I've experienced recently? So if you think about your own experiences, can you think of a time when you felt shame? And I'm not just trying to make you feel bad, but I'm trying to help you connect to an experience that is a common human experience. So like for me, I remember just recently at work that I was in a work meeting and I had some things, a hard topic to bring up in that setting. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to try practicing some vulnerability. I've learned all this stuff about vulnerability. I've got to practice what I preach, but vulnerability does not come naturally to me at all. And so I was like, okay, I've got to test myself here. And so I gave it a go. And I'm in front of this, I think it was about 30 different colleagues. It was quite a large meeting. And I'm going through this hard topic, and I really start to express a little bit of vulnerability there. And I talk about how connected I feel with that team and how important that team is to me. And then the worst thing in the world happened to me. And my voice started to thicken with emotion. And I almost started to feel like tears coming up. And then my brain just went, no, like you cannot do this. You cannot suddenly tear up in front of like 30 of your colleagues. That would be the absolute worst thing that could happen. So I sort of like had that little shutdown thoughts. I like raced through the rest of my thing, and then I sat silently in the rest of the meeting and drew no more attention to myself whatsoever, and then left that meeting and then brainstormed ways I could never attend that meeting. Do I need to send an email? What do I need to do to avoid those people for the rest of the time I work there? And then and now I'm going to feel the same because I've been vulnerable with you all. No. And then I felt, that storm of shame afterwards. But it's helpful to just understand, because then what I could do was what we're going to talk about later. But if you just notice that shame response in yourself, that will help you connect with where we're going in this conversation, and also help you connect with other people who are in that place. What is the research on intervention with shame? So there's heaps here. So, there's a lot of big researchers like Kristen Neff, who's in self-compassion, who talks a lot about shame. Brené Brown's a big voice in shame and vulnerability. A lot of the traditional interventions like CBT and DBT, people looked at them and how they interact with shame. And there's some core ideas that come through in the research time and time again. So the first one is this idea of like recognizing shame. And shame, you can see there, it's a covert agent. It loves to operate beneath the surface. It loves to operate slightly from the shadows. And just talking about shame, just noticing shame, just acknowledging and vocalizing shame is quite a powerful intervention in and of itself. It's also interesting how it relates to others. So if I was to talk to Andrew here, and I was to say, Andrew, the most embarrassing thing happened to me the other day, how have I primed Andrew to respond? Andrew's very compassionate, so he'll feel sorry for me. In my friend group, a lot of people will, you're a little bit primed also to laugh. You know what I mean? Like, this is the most embarrassing story I have, and your friend group's like, oh, I feel bad for you, and that's hilarious. But maybe that's just my friend group. Maybe I'm doing lots of oversharing today. But if I was to say, Andrew, that I felt real shame about something that happened to me the other day, he's going to come into that conversation a little bit different and prepared for something different. So I've helped him and keyed him into a way of relating to me that's actually going to be really much more helpful for me. Because if I'm coming in with a shameful story, I tell him it's an embarrassing story, and he goes, I feel bad for you, but that's hilarious. Where's that going to leave me? Versus the opposite. So recognizing shame and where it's operating in our lives or in other people and where it's operating in their lives, hugely helpful. Again, with the defensiveness reaction. If you respond as dealing with somebody and you treat it just as anger or aggression, you're going to go down a very different path than when you see it as shame and go down a path talking about that with them, whether they can tolerate that. So second, after you recognize it's there, it's this idea of tolerate and not reacting immediately on the shame. And so again, there's lots of different ways that this is done in different therapeutic modalities. DBT talks a lot about this, and distress tolerance and managing the emotion and riding the wave and things like that. ACT talks a lot about this idea. There's a common therapeutic technique we call externalizing. And I've got a little picture of a parrot because when it was taught to me, they took this idea of this poisonous parrot that sits on your shoulder and is just repeating things. And parrots repeat the things they hear lots of. They don't necessarily repeat the things that are true. So you've got this parrot who's repeating the same sort of things on your shoulder. And, that's what I was experiencing that day after that meeting of they've seen that you can't even manage your own emotions. How can you be a psychologist in the school? They've seen now your weaknesses. They've seen now. And, to be able to externalize that and go, okay, I can hear shame talking to me right now. I can hear the poisonous parrot is acting. It just gives you a little bit of space between the stimulus and the response. I was reminded today of a great quote that Viktor Frankl has about making that space between stimulus and response, and that space allows us to react and have some agency. Before I go into that one, actually, there's another great way. I talked about that idea of how activating and how threatening shame can be. And sometimes you need something really effective just to calm that nervous system response. You've gone full into the sympathetic nervous system activation, and you just want to bring it back. And, from Andrew Huberman's lab in Stanford, they did this interesting experiment looking at different sort of exercises you could do within 5 minutes and which one was the best at reducing sympathetic nervous system activation. And the one that seemed to come out on top in that one study was this idea of cyclic sighing, this breathing exercise that I thought we might do at the moment. So you guys are probably pretty chilled at the moment, but we'll give it a go anyway. You can put it in your back pocket and use it when you need it. But the idea is that you just make yourself comfortable, give yourself a bit of space, right? And then I want you to I'll talk you through it first and you can do it with me, all right? So I'm going to ask you to take a big breath in, so your lungs are pretty much full, and then I'm going to ask you to take a second breath on top of that one without breathing out. So it'll be a shorter one. Hold it for a second, and then an extended exhale. And we breathe in through the nose. You can exhale either way, all right? So take a big breath in, and a second, and the extended exhale. And 2 or 3 of these can be really effective, or you can make it a bit of a breathing practice and manage. Anyone feeling a bit more chilled after that? Yeah, nice. Anyone feeling more stressed after that? Anyone presenting later today feeling stressed? So things like that help give our bodies space between the stimulus and response, a chance for us to react out of a place of our values and our goals rather than just out of the emotion. The third doesn't come up in necessarily every type of intervention, but it comes up in enough that I thought worth talking about. This idea of adopting a new narrative. In CBT, they talk a lot about thought challenging. Narrative therapy talks a bit about this. Attachment-based therapy, your narratives around connection. But this idea of, I was talking about the thoughts that the parrot was saying and the narrative that was playing in my head about what vulnerability meant, what showing weakness to my colleagues meant. And sometimes we need a radically different way to see ourselves or see vulnerability or see compassion. And then the last step is common amongst them all, is this idea of we need to then move towards something. So, with vulnerability, it's all about vulnerability so that you can move towards another person and have meaningful connection with that other person. With ACT, it's that idea of values, value-led behaviour, being able to connect with my values. Even the self-compassion research that Kristen Neff works on, it's all about so that you can then reach out with compassion towards other people after you've managed to extend that self-compassion towards yourself. Moving towards other people, moving towards the things we care about is really important. Opposite behaviour in DBT. So with that framework in mind, I just wanted to now sidestep across to the idea of spirituality and see how that fits into all of this. And that's a huge topic as well. And psychology and spirituality have always had an interesting relationship. And recently, I think, if I was to characterise it, it would be that psychology has been fascinated with studying little tools that it can just pinch from spirituality and then put it into a therapeutic model in some way, shape or form. So, things like mindfulness have been really, really big lately. Things like concept of near enemies, different things like that. So, and even studying prayer and things like that. And how do we then fit this within a model? But I kind of wanted to do this in a way that would be a little bit authentic. And I have to lean, therefore, on a spirituality that I'm familiar with, the whole tradition, and I would feel inauthentic just cherry-picking some things. So I thought I'd talk about Christianity and then how the Bible might then give this narrative or help us understand the topic of shame and how there might be a dialogue between the two. You might get a bit of a sense of what happens when a psychologist approaches the scriptures and what do they pull out of them. So, in the beginning, right, we have the Garden of Eden, you have Adam and Eve. And, it describes this idea of God created mankind in their own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. And this idea that, this is our identity, is to be made in the image of God. And that idea of it being pronounced as good, I think, is really noteworthy. It goes on to say, Adam and his wife were both naked and they felt no shame. And this really stood out to me because it made me think, is this like the Bible commenting on why shame is such a uniquely dehumanizing emotion? Anger doesn't have this association necessarily with us. Sadness doesn't have this association. In fact, sadness can really connect us with other people. Anger can connect us with other people, If there's a righteous indignation, you guys can actually bond over a crusade of, look at this, I can't believe people don't have access to clean filtered water. And anger can push us together as a community, right? Where shame has this thing of making us feel less than, unhuman. And I love this idea of the picture of the Garden of Eden in the beginning. There is no shame. That's not a part of God's plan at all. And they're both naked. There's this complete connection. No need to hide at all from each other or from God. And then we have, so this complete it's another narrative which we can approach or respond to shame. And then we had the fall, right? They eat from the fruit from the forbidden tree, and their eyes, both of them, were opened, and they realized that they were naked, so they sew fig leaves together and make coverings for themselves. You instantly see this need to hide, right? Withdraw, separate, distance themselves, put a barrier between themselves and each other and God. And the other thing that comes up, right? Anyone think of the other thing that comes up after that, the other response to shame? Hide. They literally hide in the garden. And then deceitful, yeah, that's true. That's also a form of hiding, right? And then they sort of blame. But she gave me so you see all the same things of shame coming out here in the biblical narrative. They're in a full-on shame storm. And we see then, there's the hiding and there's the blame. And so we see God's response then. The Lord God made garments of skin for Adam and his wife and clothed them. And I think this is quite a uniquely grace-filled response, that he sort of met them with the need that they had at that time, even if it wasn't a need that they were sort of meant to have originally. He sees sort of their brokenness and then clothes them. And he provides the clothes, and clothes then become a sign of provision, actually, throughout the rest of the Bible. And this is a whole theme that you can follow through. And ultimately, it's a theme that concludes with this idea of grace. So grace and shame are completely antithetical to each other. Shame can't exist in an environment of grace. And that's why vulnerability is so effective, because when you are vulnerable with other people, if they respond with criticism, then the shame just builds. But if they respond with grace, that's, the shame can't exist in that environment anymore. It's like a petri dish with shame's in it, and then you've just sprayed it with antibacterial. I hand over to my mum. She knows all the biochemistry stuff and how petri dishes work. But that's really what we see. We know this as humans. If you think about a time you felt shame and then someone responded with grace, it's the most incredible experience you can imagine. And this follows through all the way through to when we talk about Jesus. So in Jesus Christ, this is in Galatians, Paul writes, so in Jesus Christ, you're all children of God through faith. For all of you who are baptized into Christ have clothed yourself with Christ. Paul's picked up on this idea of being clothed, but not by animal skins anymore, but clothed with Christ. And that image of just being wrapped around and completely enshrouded both has this idea of like a compassionate response being held and completely accepted. But also then we have what people see when they look at us is completely transformed as well. It's like a healing of what happened at the beginning. And so it gives us a new direction of what to move towards as well. We move towards other people, and we have the spiritual element of being able to move towards the scriptures, move towards God. It gives people, in fact, a whole new narrative and a whole new direction to move towards. It's like another dimension with which we can talk and relate to people. And I think that's helpful because sometimes people struggle in the midst of shame still to connect to other people, or they find it that they can't even kind of connect with themselves. And so they need something outside of themselves, a higher power, something above to move towards. And I think in psychology, we keep hitting upon these topics that, are really helpful to bring another dimension into. I'm thinking about topics like hope, topics like gratitude, topics like forgiveness. These are topics that we know from research. They're really important attributes. But to have another lens to look at them through and have those two things come together is incredibly powerful for people and gives them language that they might otherwise struggle with, and gives them concepts and ideas and pictures that they can use and lean upon. So I hope that gives you a little something to lean upon and see a way that these dimensions can kind of come together. And I really thank you for being here and being part of this and giving your attention today. Cheers.
Thanks so much, Andrew. That was fantastic, for all your brilliant thoughts on spirituality and mental health, and lifting the lid on shame. It's really hard to talk about these things, and it's even harder to talk about them in about 25 minutes. So another round of applause for Andrew. And right now, we're just going to have a quick video about hope.